All right, hopefully you guys can see and hear me now. I'm hoping. So I want to get back to where I was a moment ago and where my grave concerns are. The Democratic coalition that came together, and I don't even know who it all is. Was it white suburban women? Was it, high school educated white men? Something produced 74, 75, and when all of the votes are counted, it's going to be close to 76, maybe 77 million people, which is incredible. But it seems like the majority of those people just voted to remove Donald Trump to bring some sort of sensibility back to the White House, which we agree that Joe Biden is a different kind of person than Donald Trump. I hope that we can at the very least agree on that. So in front of us is going to be the coronavirus pandemic. Pfizer is in the lead right now with a vaccine. You're going to have to take two doses of it, 3 weeks apart. The biggest obstacle that we have, other than the 71 days of Donald Trump's destruction, he still has 71 days to do everything from recess appointments of federal judges to not allowing transition resources to flow into the Biden camp so they can start implementing government. This is going to be exactly what Donald Trump said or didn't say was going to be a peaceful transition. The Republican Party needs to be broken after what they did to this country. And the ones that stuck by Donald Trump and enabled him and enabled the coronavirus pandemic to go unchecked and did not want to talk about another stimulus for American families who are suffering right now, they should pay a price for that. But I don't know if the Democrats and their 74, 75 million people that voted for Joe Biden are going to be unified in making sure that a Republican Party does not get that kind of power again to do the kind of destruction. I have a feeling we're all going to be very forgiving. People are going to forgive Donald Trump. Oh, I'm just glad that he's gone. All of the momentum that we saw take place really in the year 2020, and it's not just George Floyd, it's not just Breonna Taylor, it's not just the protests that we saw, it's not just the pandemic, it's everything. It's the economic situation that existed in this country the entire time Donald Trump was president. All of those things are still major factors, and we're going to need a really strong coalition of the Democratic voters, even Republicans that voted for Joe Biden, have to be a part of the coalition to begin to fix some of these issues, or at least talk about them, or at least begin to address them. The conversation I had yesterday, I wanted it to be much more productive than it was. I don't think it was very productive, and I wanted to give a perspective on the moderate Democrats and then the progressives that have an agenda that is just intractable. Like, it is firm, it is fixed. There is zero compromise on some of those agenda items. And I understand that because these are problems that we have allowed to fester and get worse over time. But the other thing that people have to keep in mind is that government does not move quickly. It is not at the federal level. Like, things can move quickly at the local level, much faster. So if there are specific things that your city needs, if you want to look at how your city spends money on things like policing, if you want to look at how your city spends money on things like helping the homeless, that is where some of those ideas can be put into practice. But expecting a divided Congress where no one wants to work with anyone. This is why I had the conversation yesterday to try and get a feel for where we were. Nobody wants to work with the Republicans. Republicans don't want to work with Democrats. Democrats don't want to work with each other. Because if you are not galvanizing and lining up behind a progressive agenda that shows so much inflexibility, we're not going to be able to govern. And so I'm saying all of this because there are people that believe that they're correct. They are right in their political stances. That we have to deal with economic inequality, which we do. We have to deal with climate. We got to prioritize all of these things, these 10 or 15 agenda items all at once, and deal with foreign policy and deal with the coronavirus. The Democratic coalition is not strong enough to do any of that because there are literally some people that if they don't begin to see the policy pronouncements of a progressive agenda, they're going to take their ball and go home. And I would argue, what's more destructive? The Republicans and the U.S. Senate still led by Mitch McConnell until further notice, or Democrats that cannot get their act together to begin to move forward on hundreds of different policy issues. Now, here's the thing. We don't have to specifically rely on the federal government and Congress to implement some of these things. But you know how difficult it is to get people to understand that some of the things that they want to see change can happen at your city level or at your county level. In Milwaukee County, we literally have a Democratic socialist who's the chairwoman of the Milwaukee County Board of Supervisors. That's where the agenda can actually start. But I think some folks who are relatively new to politics, and a lot of people are, they've never followed it before because their lives have not depended on it like their lives depend on policy and politics right now. It is literally a life or death situation. And that caused some people to vote the way they did or to change their vote or to get off the sidelines. I still don't believe we got 70% voter turnout. I don't think 70% of the people in this country found it urgent enough to vote. I don't think we hit 70%. So that in and of itself means this is a very hollow victory. If we can't get 75 or 80% of the people who are mostly at home because they lost their jobs or because of the pandemic that have to homeschool their children because the school districts have decided to shut down after they decided to open too early. If we can't motivate more people than that, I mean, that's a whole nother discussion. Maybe we just need Stacey Abrams to just encourage people to vote all over the place. Maybe that's what we do. We Georgia the entire United States. But I don't know what it's going to take if people don't want to govern. So we've made a couple of things abundantly clear. I think you guys have seen this, that the Republicans in the US Senate, they don't want to have anything to do with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and her leadership and the probably hundreds of bills, some of which are extremely progressive in their leanings, that have come out of the House of Representatives, including impeaching the president. Because remember, the country was reasonably split on impeaching Donald Trump. It happened anyway. I don't know what the ultimate gain was. It's almost like impeachment becomes just an asterisk. In fact, if I don't talk about it, I don't remind people of it, people forget that Donald Trump was impeached. They just forget because it didn't really do much. It didn't slow him down one bit. Didn't stop his donations. It didn't, pull some Republicans away as far as those that were supporting him. I don't think he lost much of anything with the impeachment, so that didn't work. But if the Democrats cannot, and maybe I'm just being overly cautious here, and I pride myself on how I view policy because I think we need to start putting some of our differences aside. The conversation of race is one that I'm sure we're going to have because those are inclusive in our differences as well. And so in every part of what we need to get done, you have the interplay of race and how are people of color who are so celebrated when they vote in 85 and 90% numbers for Joe Biden. And the only time that we saw Joe Biden pound his fist on the podium when he gave his speech, when he gave his speech on Saturday, the only time he pounded his fist is when he talked about Black people having his back and he is going to have their back as well. The only time he showed that old school, raw Joe Biden emotion. And I think that's great. Thank you, Joe. But you're going to have to do a lot more than pound your fist. I also believe that his administration will be very diverse. So when I say very diverse, there's going to be a lot of Black people in the Biden administration. And you know what that's going to do, whether they want to admit it right now? Even some of the white folks that voted for Joe Biden because they like him and they want him to be a great president are going to be a little upset with the amount of Black people that are going to be in that administration. Oh, you just watch. It's so predictable. These are very predictable things. You watch. But I don't know if anybody's ready to govern in that if you have a real specific agenda and you want to see climate change at the top of the list, like that's the only reason why you voted, because we know how destructive Donald Trump was on issues of climate. If that is your issue and you're not seeing enough progress on the issue of climate, then are you just going to give up altogether? That's what I'm actually really concerned about. Are there people that are going to stick with this and do the tough work of governing? Because here's the horrible word, and nobody wants to hear it, because there's always Democrats that have to do it. Because aren't we the bigger people here in all of this? Aren't Democrats the bigger people? We got to compromise. First and foremost, we're going to have to compromise with each other. And I really don't see it. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't see how Democrats are going to compromise with each other. I don't know how. Because there is just this mentality of folks who are just incredibly dug in, right? They're not willing to compromise even with other Democrats. And so I don't know where we strike a happy tone. And so while we're going through all of this and people are not going to take the vaccine, that's going to take up a lot of oxygen in the room because people are going to get mad that some people are taking the coronavirus vaccine and other people are going to tell you that it's poisonous and all these other things. I don't. But I don't see any common ground amongst Democrats that some of which will tell you, and they're going to continue to tell us. It's like, how do you know that people are members of a gym? Because they tell you, and progressives are going to tell you that they voted for Joe Biden and they hate Joe Biden. They didn't want to vote for Joe Biden, but they're going to stand on that forever. And Joe Biden is a Republican, all these other things. Don't worry, those people are not going away. But how do we get people that are going to blame us for why they voted for Joe Biden to work on compromise? To have to put pieces of your agenda on the side temporarily so we can begin to address these issues one at a time. We're not going to be able to work with Republicans anytime soon because they clearly believe that they won the election, which these next couple of weeks are going to be very pivotal. And now we're coming to find out that a lot of Donald Trump donors are pulling away from him because what he wants to do, and there's a fracturing in the Republican Party that Democrats need to take advantage of, but I feel that we don't know how. You have some Republicans, the big dollar donors, that don't want to give Donald Trump any money for his legal fight because he lost the election in at least 5 different states, like the ones that were still counting ballots. He lost, and the margins are such that there's nothing that can be done aside from him trying to steal the election. And I assure you, they are working on that in these next 71 days he's in the White House. If he can steal this election, then he will. So that's the only voter fraud that is going on right now. In fact, one of the a member of the Department of Justice who oversees election law just resigned in protest because they're looking for fraud that does not exist, meaning that they're going to try and invent it. Because Donald Trump needs to keep his base fired up because these poor souls believe that this election was stolen from Donald Trump. They believe that. So the Republican Party is in this very unusual crossroads, and Democrats are not going to know how to take advantage of it because we're split in our own right. Big Republican money would rather put their dollars in the U.S. Senate runoffs in Georgia because you only have a limited amount of donors. It seems like they have unlimited money. They do not. A lot of money was spent on this presidential election. And if Donald Trump is asking people in his party to send money for his lawsuits and his legal defense in all of these states, and him going on offense actually in some of these states, trying to sue to overturn the election and to stop counting votes here, but count more votes there. That's a very expensive and time-consuming effort. But the amount of money that they are contributing to that frivolous effort to try and sue all of these states, I don't even know what they're suing for. Like all of the legal scholars that have weighed in, Democrat, Republican, and like true independent legal minds, all say that Donald Trump's legal arguments are dead on arrival. Every last one of them. All of them. But if they're going to be taking their resources away from the runoffs in Georgia, then Democrats need to exploit that opportunity. There still is a chance for Democrats to get the majority in the U.S. Senate. It will make things so much easier until we realize that with unified government, except for the Supreme Court, one party rule, the presidency, the House of Representatives, where the majority the Democrats had slipped a little bit. There's no way the Democrats should have lost seats, but we can have that conversation later. So there's an opportunity to get the majority in the U.S. Senate. And then when that happens, now is where the real fighting is going to begin. How are Democrats going to move forward? Let's assume that we get the coronavirus pandemic somewhat under control on the heels of the 2022 midterm elections, because that's really going to be for all the marbles. The next time Americans go back and vote in national elections, the first referendum on the Biden administration is going to be, how did Joe Biden do? How is the economy? Did Joe Biden provide resources to people? Were there more stimulus checks? Like, what has he done? And that's going to be the referendum on him. And Democrats have the ability to make sure that Joe Biden is successful because there's 74, 75 million of us, I think, if we can be unified. But here's where the fighting is going to start, because the referendum on Joe Biden is going to be reflective of Democrats are going to argue incessantly with one another about how we move forward next. Like, what is it going to be? Because everybody who voted for Joe Biden, especially those that didn't want to, and they'll tell you, they're very proud to say that they didn't want to vote for him. It's almost like they're doing somebody else a favor by doing so. Look, great. You cast your vote. In fact, you don't even have to tell anybody who you voted for. We should be only if we can take advantage of, like Benjamin Franklin said, we have a republic if we can keep it. And I think that just the division that exists in this country is so inherent in everything and everybody. Like I don't have the option to not look through a racial lens because it has shaped and defined my life. And so I have to see how African Americans are going to fare in all of this because it's not just economic inequality, it's also the coronavirus. Among other things, in the racism that exists in our healthcare delivery systems, 1 in 1,000 Black people are going to die from coronavirus, plus the other stuff that kills us. Many things kill Black people. Lots of things. There's a long list of things that kill us. We got to worry about this as well. So all of these items will affect African Americans more severely than everybody else, yet we're celebrated because of how we turned out in Milwaukee and Detroit and Philadelphia. But are those celebrations of our vote going to turn into, hey, you know what, everybody? Maybe we should look at the African American community because they are the ones that voted, especially in the primary process, to give us Joe Biden. And looking how this election shook out, there was not another Democrat who was running for the nomination that could have performed as well as Joe Biden. You may want to tell yourself that any of the 15, 16, 37 Democrats that were vying for the nomination, Beto O'Rourke wouldn't have got this result. Amy Klobuchar? No. Julian Castro wouldn't have got this result. Remember Eric Sowell? Of course you don't, because he was running for president too, and he almost didn't matter. He wouldn't have got this result. It was the strength of the African American vote, and none of that should be lost on any of you. And so, how does the policy help? The Biden administration needs to have a real specific aim on the African American community, and what that is going to show, and it's going to be to great disappointment, that some of our white friends and white allies are going to get a little upset because they voted for Joe Biden too. And why isn't he moving on these progressive agenda items that we told him that we wanted to see? This is where the fighting is going to come in. And this is all good, healthy debate if it was any other time in American history. But the Democrats are in a good position to have these arguments and these debates because they may have control of the US Senate. Nancy Pelosi still has the speaker's gavel. I'm hearing all sorts of hate on Nancy Pelosi. It's amazing. It's like you get a woman to be vice president, but then all of a sudden Nancy Pelosi is a demon. Like, women leadership in this country is at its highest levels, I think, ever. Now, the other flip side to that, there are more Republican women in the House of Representatives than ever. How did that even happen? How did that? Good morning, everybody. Sahara Ali, good morning. Eileen Seeger says, hello. For one, I cannot wait for January 20th. Looking forward to a diverse cabinet. There's a lot of destruction that can happen. Like, Donald Trump will probably, he's going to do something. Like, he's going to get a whole bunch of Trump supporters to get in their cars and beep their horns at the same time during the inauguration. It's going to be a complete mess. But what I'm worried about is we're going to lose this moment and the ability to govern and compromise because Democrats are so incredibly fragmented between those who are in the center, who just want to see forward progress, really at this point on anything, economic inequality, the coronavirus, anything. And then those that came to the polls to vote for Joe Biden against their best wishes, because they're going to tell us how much they hate him and how much he's a Republican, there's not going to be very much compromise amongst Democrats. And it's going to be a referendum in 2022, and the Democrats are going to lose everything. They're going to lose everything. The Republicans have this opportunity, you see. They got 70 plus million people. If you voted for Donald Trump this time, you are a worse person than if you voted for him in 2016. In 2016, it's like, let's see what he's going to do. I don't like Mexicans. Maybe we should build a wall. He's a businessman. There's going to be money growing all over the place, and money's going to be flowing in something China. And don't forget, Wisconsin was a recipient of Donald Trump's first campaign promise. I'm going to bring jobs back from China. Look at Foxconn. It is a shell of its former self. And we owe Foxconn money for coming here and not even creating the jobs they said they were going to create. So everything in Donald Trump's first term was a miserable failure. I would like to say that one of the benefits of having Trump in office is that it brought a lot of people together, but only temporarily. We did come together on election day. We did come together in the streets to celebrate. People did come together in protest of some of the egregious things that took place over the summer. That was good, but it was also very short-lived. And if we can't figure out how to govern amongst ourselves that we're going to lose the midterm elections. And we're going to talk about the whole Biden presidency is going to be a waste. And this also is going to wear negatively on Kamala Harris. And now you got people, well, Kamala Harris locked up a bunch of black people. Everybody locks up black people. Like, can we just, like, everybody has a role in sending black people to prison. Now, what I will say about the 1994 crime bill, which for some reason has become very popular, I think it's still probably trending on social media, 1994 crime bill, is that what that bill didn't do is it did not differentiate between those that were intentionally creating havoc and harm in communities, especially black communities, and those that needed drug treatment. Everyone was a criminal with the 1994 crime bill. In the last 26 years, we have learned an awful lot about criminal justice. As time goes on, things get better. But to all of a sudden freeze moments in time and say, oh, they just locked up a bunch of black people and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris locked up a bunch of black people. There are black judges that also sentence black people for crimes that black people were guilty of, right? But I think the climate around criminal justice, the pendulum has swung more toward rehabilitation. And we see that with the current drug epidemic that we have going on, that for some reason you don't really hear much about. There have been more heroin overdoses in the year 2020 than I'd imagine in previous years. And you can understand why. The pandemic has had this insidious effect on every social ill that exists in this country. If there was a social ill that existed, the pandemic made it worse. It made homelessness worse. It made poverty worse. It made addiction worse. Everything got dramatically worse. But then, and here's the other really weird irony, right? So we learned a lot about the drug epidemic in the 1980s and 1990s, the crack epidemic, that we don't want to just throw people in prison that have an actual addiction issue. This is a focus on mental health. This is what people have always wanted. One of the benefits that came from the horrible mistakes that were made with the 1994 crime bill is that we look at people that have addiction issues as someone that needs a different type of medical treatment, a focus on mental health. And so now we hear these stories of someone who gets caught with heroin and they don't go to jail, they don't go to prison, they're getting treatment, and we get mad at that. The whole benefit of learning from the 1994 crime bill, which people can say they universally hate, they hated it, it was a terrible thing. But when you are bearing fruit from what we've learned and we're not treating people with mental health issues and addiction issues like criminals, then people get mad at that. Well, if this was 1987, it was crack, we'd be throwing these people in jail for forever. Isn't that the whole point? We don't want to put people in jail forever because they have addiction issues. Like, what do we even want? And where is the leadership to try and guide this? Because Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are going to be so preoccupied with the coronavirus that we're going to have to look elsewhere. Are we going to have to look at Andrew Cuomo maybe to be the national leader on some of these issues? Because I know that he was fantastic during the early days of the coronavirus pandemic. We're all over the place. And the victories are short-lived. And I know it's a great relief that Joe Biden was elected, but what's the logical next step after that? And are Democrats going to be as unified in the policy agenda as they were on election day? Election law is something else that needs to be seriously revamped because, and states have this latitude, as we clearly have seen, as they're still counting votes. And rightfully so, because more people voted in this election than any other American election. It's going to take more time to count all those votes because we broke the system. We exceeded the capacity to count votes in a timely manner, especially because so many of those votes came via mail. And this is where Donald Trump screwed up. Why would you not encourage your people to vote by mail? Don't you want to count every single vote that you can possibly get? And when I was involved in local campaigns, which is a young man's game, I'm not really into that stuff anymore. You want to have the election won by election day, meaning that you want to take advantage of early voting and early voting locations and vote by mail so that any additional votes that you get on election day proper puts you over the top. But if you thoroughly take advantage of all of the days and all the different locations and sites we have in a normal election year in Milwaukee, today was a little bit different, or this election cycle was a little bit different, not today. You want to take full advantage of getting as many votes as you can for the longest period of time that you can, because people they're resistant to voting. And so you got to get every vote that you possibly can. You take advantage of early votes. So whatever comes in on election day puts you over the top. What Donald Trump did is he tried to win on election day instead of taking advantage and telling his supporters, let me tell you what, had Donald Trump done two things, worn a mask, and wear a mask like a Make America Great Again, a MAGA mask, had he worn that, his followers would have went and would have purchased them. He would have made tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars on those. We would have slowed the spread of the coronavirus by doing these two simple things. One, Trump wearing a mask and then telling people to go buy his mask, even though it's disgusting and it's egregious. He's taking economic advantage and financial advantage, trying to get financial gain off the pandemic. It would have ultimately saved lives. And then if Donald Trump would have encouraged people to vote early by mail for him, to say, you know what, guys, the mail is safe. You can vote by mail. Hell, he voted by mail. Donald Trump would have beat Joe Biden. He would have beat him. But it was because so many of his voters waited until election day. You got to keep in mind, I don't know when other states started their elections or their early voting. People received their ballots in Wisconsin the week of September 14th. 2 months we were getting votes for Joe Biden, and the result in Wisconsin was only 20,000 votes. And we were voting 2 full months before these Republicans that were going to only vote on election day. And I need people to really understand that. With a 2-month head start, because Democrats were just incessant in telling people to vote early, vote by mail, don't go to the polls. And we did. We definitely voted early and took advantage of it. And the advantage was only 20,000 votes. Had Donald Trump encouraged his supporters, he could have overcome the deficits in these states. I know he could have. Good morning, Charles Reeves, Udell Harris. Good morning to you. Patrice Goldberg, the Republicans can believe what they want, but they need to face reality. They lost and Trump is going to jail. Alden Higgins says they need to just leave it alone. It won't overturn anything. Such a waste. And the other question that Alden brings up, why is it hard for Democratic Party to turn out voters? If that's not the $1 million question, I don't know what is. So the tent is so big. There's so many issues. It's racial issues. It's criminal justice reform. It's redistricting. It's it's climate. It's wage inequality. There's so many issues, and because there's like literally probably hundreds of them, and depending upon where you live in the country, it might be fracking. Never heard so much about fracking in my whole life. Clean energy, Green New Deals. There's so many different issues, and some people are one issue voters. And here's what I will give to the Republicans. And the Democrats can't do this. They're not a party that's even set up to be simple. It's too complicated. It's like the fate of the world lies on the Democrats. All of the issues, all the social issues, all the social problems, all the things that arise from inequality are things that are in the Democrats' purview because Republicans fail to even admit. I posted a picture or a meme. I think Justin posted, somebody posted it in the Forum Facebook group, that when asked about the issues of race and policing and are Black people treated fairly, like the contrast between Trump supporters and Republicans and Democrats is staggering. We're talking about things that are blatantly obvious in this nation. Some people fail to see them. That also explains why they can't do the math of Donald Trump losing the election. But what makes it so difficult for Democrats to turn voters out, and I can just speak as an African American that have had these conversations with the Black community in one form or another for many, 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 many years. I mean, down to the nitty gritty, the granular details of what Black people, and we're not a monolith. There's some Black people vote for Republicans, which, I mean, I guess you can do whatever you want in life, I guess, I suppose. But when they ask the fundamental question, what is going to change for African Americans? Like, what if I vote for a Democrat, if I vote for Joe Biden, the first thing they talk about is a 1994 crime bill because that's the only thing that they know about him. Oh, and that he was Barack Obama's vice president for 8 years, which all of a sudden doesn't count for much of anything. But what is he really going to do? And maybe we should look at it as a race of people that can't decide if we want to be Black when we wake up in the morning. We can't just decide to be something else. Like, you've got white women in the suburbs who stood silent and raise kids in their segregated neighborhoods and move to those neighborhoods because they didn't want their children to grow up in the city around Black people and around diversity. And they benefited from that institutional racism. And they moved away. And then they found out that they were getting shafted too. And they listened to their Republican husbands and they used the N-word all in their homes, and they demoralize and dehumanize Black people because you don't see any. They don't live in your neighborhood. They're not going to school with your kids. Or the Black kids that do go to school out there, well, they're different. They were adopted by a good, wholesome white family. They're okay, but it's those other Negroes you see. But it's weird because those other Negroes that you want to move away from helped get Joe Biden a victory, and now you celebrate that, but you still don't want to live next to him. But then when those white women decide that, well, I've had enough of benefiting from these Republican policies and benefiting from the segregation, the economic segregation, and moving away from the city as far as I can possibly get to be away from the cultural influence of anything that is not white and evangelical Christian, they all of a sudden can turn on a dime and say, we've had enough of this. We want to be liberals and progressives now. Y'all think we don't see through that? That's another problem. People are toying with the Democratic Party. This, and I got to also explain the loyalty that African Americans have to the Democratic Party, because it's not loyalty like you think. It is not. It is, here is one of the many tools that we can use to get some kind of justice, a little bit. Somewhere, somehow, there could be a policy that makes things a little bit better, very slowly, very incrementally. To be Black in this country is to have an exorbitant amount of patience with a system that tells you every single day, you're not the same, you're different. And when all of that is being said, it's really very complicated. Why is it so hard to get Black people to vote? Because if you go and you cast your vote, like, what magical thing happens? Like, what did you get other than a feeling of pride? Like, oh, I did the right thing. And then we always quote the ancestors. Like, oh, the ancestors wanted us to vote. They couldn't vote. And we loved saying, oh, Black people fought and died for our right to vote. Okay. But you understand that was a low bar? That there was so much effort and so much struggle just to get African Americans to be able to vote and then get a handful of federal protections, which have all been rescinded. And then we get the right to vote because that sets a low bar. Like, now we can at least participate in the elections, but we have to then use those elections, especially at the local level, which we pretend doesn't even exist, which I would argue is the most important level of government. We don't use the leverage for all of the fighting and the dying and the bleeding and all the John Lewises in the world, because we love to quote John Lewis and white folks quote John Lewis too. Let's get into some good trouble. Oh my God, it's so cute. That ain't cute. Y'all gonna have to stop that. Stop playing with that man's legacy. Because it was your grandparents that were throwing bricks at him. And you still have Thanksgiving with your grandparents. What really is going to change? What are the tangible benefits that we get from voting other than getting a pat on the back? And so the loyalty that people believe, this is folks that don't know Black people but think they do. Like, you don't have anything in common with the culture because you vote for the same candidates. You're voting for Democrats for very different reasons. If you're voting for Democrats for the Green New Deal, that's one thing. If you're voting for Democrats because they can have a profound impact on the criminal justice system, y'all ain't the same. You're not the same, especially if, those white suburban women who are going to steal the election from Black people that went out and sacrificed. Well, we did it. We got tired of living under this Republican regime. They benefit from the tax cuts too. They wasn't that mad at Donald Trump. If you live out in the suburbs in a $500,000 house and your income is net 600 grand every single year, you might not like what Donald Trump says, but you like what he did. And that's not lost on me. But the loyalty that is perceived that Black people have toward Democrats is because it is one of the many tools that we can achieve some semblance of justice, because voting for Republicans is almost like being Black and having complete amnesia and memory loss. And because, African American men, other than Reconstruction, we have been more negatively impacted by policies of both political parties than anybody else. And so trying to find your way in the world and trying to find opportunity and trying to find jobs and dodging the police and dodging discrimination and all those other things makes this even more complicated than it needs to. But if you just simplify everything, because we love to simplify things. We don't want the details. We don't want all the facts behind it. We certainly don't know history. We look at all the details of everything. Well, if white people that vote for Republicans are seeing a benefit from it, right? Because they're very strong in their beliefs. I'm going to talk about that in a second. Like if you're a Republican now, an evangelical or whatever, there's so many different sections of the Republican Party, but they all have a really simple set of beliefs. It just makes it simple. So wait a minute, you mean to tell me that all lives matter? Well, wait a minute, I'm a black man. That means that my life matters too. Well, wait a minute, I like the police. Here's another one. I believe in God. Black people go to church. Black people are sometimes evangelical in their leanings. And wait a minute. Well, I don't like abortion. It's very easy if you take the simple route and if you just want to simplify your life, because thinking about race all of the time and how it negatively impacts you is so exhausting. I wish y'all understood. It's so exhausting. But if you can go to a party that says, well, we don't care if you're black, even though they do, then why not simplify your life? Vote for God, vote for the Bible, vote to be against abortion, vote for business, vote for lower taxes. But then here's the other thing that Republicans were able to do, and they're going to fortify this message because they're putting more effort into taking votes out of black communities than anybody else, is they can tell us, especially in black communities that have always suffered disproportionate poverty, regardless of who the damn president is. There's poverty in black communities that have existed in this city for generations, and probably your city too, unless you live in the suburbs and you can decide what political party you want to play with. It's like some of those suburban folks they're married to the Republican Party, but they cheat. They go slumming with the Democrats every so often, and they pat themselves on the back like, I did a good thing. Yay. I didn't vote for a Nazi. They got a low bar for success as well. The Republicans are able to tell black people, you know what? Real simple stuff, real simple language. These Mexicans are taking your job. What have the Democrats done for you? You get these people that come over here, they come to America, they get your jobs. That's why your neighborhood looks the way it does. Blame these other immigrants. And that's a really easy thing to sell to people that look around and see nothing but neglect of their communities. If you can blame someone else, that's why I played that Tim Wise clip at the beginning of the first broadcast. The pedigree of politics in America is rich white people telling poor and working class white people that their problem is brown people. But now the inverse can be true. You can tell poor black folks that their issue is not the system of white supremacy. It's somebody, an illegal alien coming from another country taking our jobs. And the last time I checked, if you're driving around the African American community, other than a handful of jobs you may see where the wages are so low, black folks couldn't live off of that money anyway. There are no people in my neighborhood speaking Spanish and taking all the jobs. When I go shopping at grocery stores or whatever it is that we do to spend money on, there's not illegal people from Honduras providing me with services. If you come to a country and you don't know the people, you don't know the culture, you don't know the language, you don't have a birth certificate, you don't have a social security card, and you come here, and if you are able to get gainful employment by lacking all of those things, not knowing the language, not knowing the culture, not having a birth certificate, not having a social security number, whatever job you get, good for you. Because if you can't, as an American with the benefit of citizenship and a birth certificate and a social security number, can't compete with someone who doesn't even know the language, then you probably weren't fit to work anyway. And I'm sorry if that sounds harsh, but they're using that rhetoric to coax more African Americans into voting for Republicans. And that trajectory is getting worse, especially if Democrats can't for a moment say, you know what, we need to have some kind of compromise and get back to governing so we can strike a medium tone between our most liberal wing of the party and our more moderate centrist wing of the party. If we can't get that together, then more and more people are going to abandon the Democratic Party altogether. There was a fantastic campaign and there was a lot of really wonderful strategies that took place during a pandemic. Some of it was overkill, but ultimately it worked. And if the Democrats, with the number of votes they got, are not showing and proving that they can work together first amongst one another, then give me a reason why anybody should vote for a Democrat ever again. I'm being very serious about this. And I know people want to get all emotional but the Democrats are just better. Cool. But if they are not delivering, and a lot of the delivering has to do with us because we're not going to get it together. We're going to argue and moderates need to move more left. And I don't see that, because if you can't compromise, then just be an activist, period. Activists don't have to compromise when they're out there on the streets. They don't have to compromise when they're talking about defunding the police. They don't have to compromise when they say Medicare for all. Listen, Medicare for all, or it's nothing. The Affordable Care Act is going before the U.S. Supreme Court, I believe, on Thursday. It's going to be an up or down vote, guys. I don't know how it's going to go, but this also is going to take a lot of oxygen out of the room, because if we completely invalidate the Affordable Care Act during a pandemic, during open enrollment for the Affordable Care Act, if we don't have a focus on that, a Green New Deal is like make a documentary about it, because it's not going to come to fruition. Good morning, Renee Lewis. Udell Harris says good morning. Lemon Harris says, damn it, almost missed my dose of Daily Sherwin. You know, you guys can always go to YouTube and then search the forum too, and then the broadcast come up there. Vaughn Mays, good morning, bro. Glad you're here. Lemon Harris says, beat these MAGA terrorists into the ground. You know, I thought there was going to be some violence. I'm glad that there wasn't. I mean, there's still plenty of time for it, I guess, because Donald Trump is not, he's not relinquishing power. And as time goes on and they drag this out, and so I can see the benefit of it, that if Donald Trump is still taking all the attention for himself and he's trying to take money from donors for his frivolous lawsuits to, I don't know, to sue states, to not, I don't know what he's trying to do something with the election. I really don't, I'm unclear as to what their aim is, to try and find widespread voter fraud. It's amazing how you get record turnout, even on the Republican side, but it's voter fraud when the Democrats also have record turnout, right? Like, how is it fraud when you have a whole bunch of people vote? Like, if the Democrats, and I hate that I have to say this because people are just, what did we do wrong with public education in this country? Can we have a conversation about that? Is that on the agenda anywhere for anybody? Are Democrats really focused on the fact that 70, no more than that, because they all didn't vote. There's probably 150 million people in this country that has the best public education system in the world that don't know anything about America, don't know how it works. They don't know fact. They don't know fact from fiction. They literally don't know. They have no clue. The biggest failure in a democracy is the inability to educate your people on the same facts. We're going to have an argument over whether the vaccine is going to kill you. It's going to put microchips in your body. What else is the vaccine going to do? It's going to give you autism. It's probably going to give you the chicken pox. I think you get smallpox if you take the vaccine. It's my body, my choice when it comes to the vaccine and when it comes to abortion. This miserable failure that we have, and hasn't it been made abundantly clear that there are some people that are just, they can be mesmerized by obvious lies, especially QAnon, who has elected a member to the House of Representatives. Not kidding you. Democrats are pedophiles that drink the blood of children. Like, they believe that. How did we lose control over simple facts? And if Democrats were going to steal the election, they probably would have started with the Senate. I'm just saying, I'm not an election stealer, but if I were one, I'm not an election stealer, but I play one on YouTube. Like, how are you going to lose ground in the House of Representatives? You're going to steal an election, get more members of Congress. Eileen Seeger says, yes, Republican messaging is simple and clear. Trump nailed lowest unemployment rate for people of color / justice reform, funding historically Black colleges is the build a bridge to the 21st century of 2020. Indeed, it's very simple. They love God, they love Bibles, they love guns. Abortion is bad. Business is very good. Government is too intrusive. Government shouldn't be telling you what to do. You should be free to live your life however you want. You can have a whole bunch of guns if you want, or you can have no guns. You can burn oil and coal if you want to. It's a kind of liberty that they sell because it fits into the fairy tale, the Santa Clausification of America. Do whatever you want. There's no racism anymore. Racism died a long time ago. Now Black people, look at Black people. They became president of the United States. This isn't a racist country. And there's some people that actually believe that. Some Black people believe it. It's all about choice. You make bad choices. You got to take responsibility for yourself. You got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And there are some Black people that have become successful. I mean, name a few. Oprah. Oprah's always at the top of the list of successful Black people. If Oprah can do it, then clearly there's no racism in America. And I know we're supposed to aim high and we're supposed to have role models and we're supposed to emulate very successful people, but everybody can't be Oprah. But because an Oprah exists, or Michael Jordan, do we like Michael Jordan or has he been canceled? I'm not sure. Michael Jordan, he's a successful basketball person. He plays basketball. He used to basketball when basketballers could basketball. Now they just play in empty arenas. But because you have those examples of success, and what it does is it makes people feel even worse because if you don't have, or you haven't had the ability to have your skills developed, and if you look and compare what public education is, because we fund public education wrong, we fund it with property taxes, but in our neighborhoods, our property taxes are so low, they devalue our property so much that you cannot adequately fund schools. But if you go just a few miles away, these schools are mini colleges and universities with all the technology you could ever imagine, not even far from the city of Milwaukee. And so we're providing different levels of opportunity for children who are all going to go out into the real world and compete for jobs. But we're starting children off on the wrong foot completely. So at some point, there's going to have to be a conversation about education. And here's what's crazy, though. So you can move away from the city of Milwaukee and pick a suburb or pick another county because now they're even out of Milwaukee County. They're in Washington County and Dodge County and Waukesha County, who have the best opportunities when it comes to education. If you look at the high school graduation rates and the college acceptance rates of kids that go to those schools, it's really good. It's congratulations to them. But their politics can almost negate everything they should have learned in these top-notch schools. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen. I don't know why more people aren't concerned about this. Like, we didn't really win much of anything, especially if Democrats are not ready to govern amongst one another. Vaughn Mays said they definitely don't teach good civics. I couldn't agree more. Well, let me see. It depends on where you went to school. So when I was in high school a long time ago, long time ago, we had a government class, and those that went to Brown High School in the late '80s to the probably early 2000s had Miss Jackie Trapp. She was our government teacher. But you know what? So I think she's mad at me because a lot of my old high school teachers, which I come to find out were ultra right wing conservatives that taught at Brown Deer Public Schools many, many years ago. I didn't know that until I got a little bit older and then they got on Facebook and I got on Facebook. Do yourself a favor. Don't add some of your old high school teachers because you're going to be terribly disappointed. Because I didn't know back then how conservative some of them were, but they were. But with Miss Trapp, I think she had argued with me about something I said on the radio one day. And I was like, oh, I didn't know you felt that way. But we had a government class and it thoroughly explained how a bill became a law. In fact, one day, and this was the big project for our government class, and those of you that went to Brown Deer, which hardly any of you did, and you had Miss Jackie Trapp's government class, you did a full session of Congress. We had either a Democratic majority or a Republican majority, and you had a minority whip, you had a majority whip, you had a Speaker of the House, you had all of the different leadership positions, and we literally gavelled in and gavelled out. We had different committees. We had pages that were running notes between Democrats and Republicans. It was really beautiful. And so if you add what Schoolhouse Rock taught us and then our government class, it was a full day. It was literally the entire day. We did a session of Congress, and then other classes, of course, would come in and they would watch. So I knew how Congress worked. To graduate from high school, you had to pass Miss Jackie Trapp's government class. So I knew. But here's what was so incredible about that mock congressional session that we had as a part of our government class. Tom Barrett got elected in 1992 to the House of Representatives. So did Russ Feingold that same year. And same year, Bill Clinton got elected. In fact, the blue wave that took George H.W. Bush out elected a whole bunch of Democrats to the House of Representatives and to the U.S. Senate. Tom Barrett won, Russ Feingold was another. So Tom Barrett was elected in 1992. In 1992, I was in the 11th grade and was taking Jackie Trapp's government class. And I remember Tom Barrett came and sat in on our mock session of Congress. And the big joke was that he came and watched our session of Congress, for our high school class, so he could learn how to be a congressman. That probably wasn't the case, but we thought it was funny. But because I knew so much then about how government worked, it fascinated me. It made me want to pursue a career in it. Fast forward 10 years from that day, I worked in Tom Barrett's congressional office. That has been lost. And I don't know if it was funding cuts or budget cuts that have taken civics out of schools. Like, I don't know what they teach kids nowadays. I have no clue. But I know there's more information readily available about everything. Everything. You can learn about everything right now. And it seems like we know less. Alden Higgins says, whitewashing the history of this country. Alden Higgins says, oh my God, yes, I added my teacher from middle school, and she does not like anything Democratic, and she's a Black woman. You guys know who James T. Harris is? You guys know James T. Harris? James T. Harris still is, a conservative talk radio host. He's from Milwaukee. He's now in Arizona, and he's an African American man, James T. Harris. He also had a show on one of the conservative radio stations here in Milwaukee some years ago. James Harris did. You guys know him? I'm sure you do. You heard of him. He's in Arizona now. Trump-loving African American man, as conservative as they get. And I believe that he got his radio show because he used to call into Charlie Sykes. When Charlie Sykes was a conservative, I don't know what Charlie Sykes is now. Well, Charlie Sykes is making money because now he was a conservative and has just destroyed Democratic policies when Charlie Sykes was on air for damn near 25 years, destroyed Democrats, destroyed, African American communities with that same racist rhetoric, and then decided he didn't like Donald Trump and then got hired by MSNBC. Must be nice. But James Harris used to call incessantly into Charlie Sykes' show, another conservative talk radio host show. And that's how James T. Harris actually got a show, because if you're black and you espouse those really ultra conservative views, you help the conservative movement dodge its moniker of being racist. Because they'll always say, well, look, I know a Black person. I even saw a quote recently, Donald Trump isn't racist because James T. Harris supports Donald Trump. And he's supported that brand of ultra conservative, destructive politics for all of the years that I've known James T. Harris. But let me tell you how I really know James T. Harris as an African American man. He was my history teacher in high school. And I had Democratic leanings as a kid. I did. I mean, I grew up in a union household. My parents worked for the post office for 40 years. And he failed me in my world history class. I also come to find out years later that James T. Harris, the same James T. Harris that's on conservative talk radio right now, would say negative things about me to my high school girlfriend. I think I put something, this is 30 years ago. Why should I even care? Well, I'm going to tell you why. Because James T. Harris is and has been a destructive force. But then when I put something up about James Harris, or there was a thread about him, because a bunch of us Brown Deer folks, we're all on social media together, and I made mention that he would say terrible things about me. Just like, why would a high school teacher? I know I sound like I'm like being petty right now, but nah, I got a long memory, and sometimes I don't forget when I've been wronged. But there were other people that also said the same thing. Hey, Sherwin, James Harris used to do the same thing to me. Told my girlfriend and my boyfriend like bad things about me. Like, when imagine a high school teacher, that's like just as bad as being a pedophile. When you're going to involve yourself as a teacher into the business of high school children. So anyways, James Harris was my high school history teacher, and he failed me. Now, of course, he tried to, slow my trajectory on graduating from high school, but I did get a much better history teacher because I had to repeat world history. Miss Stanton, Susan Stanton. She's on Facebook too. Thank God she's a liberal. But just that's my story of James T. Harris. So he has just been causing destruction. And I've known him. That's almost 30 years I've known this man. And there was also a time when he was on talk radio on the conservative side, and I was on talk radio on the Black side. And I remember challenging him and Charlie Sykes to a debate. We're all on the radio at the same time in the city of Milwaukee. And actually, some of us were broadcasting at the same time. And I challenged them to a debate, and they can invite people, and I would invite people. And the audience would judge who won the political debate. Me against James Harris against Charlie Sykes. Clearly, they didn't want any smoke, and the debate never happened. But just a little backstory about the conservative, destructive policies of a James Harris, who is still on the radio right now in Arizona. He was actually one of those that was demeaning John McCain as well. And it's just sad that that's the connection that I have to him, as him being my high school teacher, but also he and I shared the same vocation in the same city for a number of years. He was doing conservative talk radio, and I was doing common sense, unbiased truth talk radio. But finding out people that you know, and maybe some of them are your friends, finding out that they're conservative, that they're Trump supporters, is a crushing feeling. Because there are some people, and you know this, there are people that you worked with, right? And you just never talked about politics with them. And I lived vicariously through a lot of my friends some of my Black friends who are in corporate America, and it's a very, very lonely space. It's a very lonely space, especially if you're in corporate America and you're Black and you're good. You're very good. You know your stuff. You were hired because you were good. There is a fear factor that goes along with that. The same fear that white folks don't want to live in Black neighborhoods and just devalue Black people and devalue Black property and devalue Black lives, why we have to say Black Lives Matter. When you get into the corporate world, they still have that same fear, because if you're Black and good, they think that you may take their job, and sometimes we do. And so it's incredibly dangerous and incredibly destructive. And if you're one of the only Black people that work in this corporation or whatever this company is, and you're good, you earned it, you have the education, you have the experience, and they should have hired you, and they did hire you, and you're good because they hired you because you're good, and then all of a sudden your coworkers want to talk about George Floyd. You guys know how hostile of a work environment that is for so many of our people? You go to work every single day to do your job. And I've been telling my people this for as long as I had breath in my lungs. Do not make friends with your coworkers. They're not your friends. They will get you fired because there's somebody in their family that does the exact same thing that you do. And they'd rather have their sister or their brother-in-law working in that job instead of you. Don't make friends with them. Don't even go to their Christmas parties. Man, they'll make you feel bad, don't they? Sure, when you want, we're having a little get together. We're having a happy hour. Worst thing you can do. And I know that you want to be included because you may feel very lonely in that space. But part of being Black and having a reasonable level of success is loneliness. That is why instead of banding together with them, you get more Black people to work there. Put pressure on them to hire more diversity. Because what will happen is you'll go to the office party, you go to a little Christmas party, you go to little ugly sweater parties, which all of a sudden I think we're going to find out that ugly sweater parties are like the new versions of Klan rallies, but we don't know that yet. And then you feel comfortable around your coworkers because you work with them every single day, and some of them are cool. This is before George Floyd. BGF, the before George Floyd, and you have AGF after George Floyd, and they're cool, and you hang out with them. They're very nice people, and they make you laugh, and they're your coworkers, and you see them every day, and you do stressful things at work, and you come through it together as a team, and yay team, and all that other corporate BS hoopla. But then they want to ask you, what do you think about this Black Lives Matter? Because now you're the Black person there. You're the Black person in the office, and you then have and hold all the opinions of all the Black people. And then they may ask you as this lone African American in the department, well, what do you think about all this rioting and all this looting? Don't answer those questions. Don't answer them. Don't answer them. Because you're going to realize that the people that you thought were your friends, that you went to ugly sweater parties with, and you went and you hung out with them, and you went to happy hour with them, you went to Christmas parties with them, hate your guts and hate everybody that looks like you. Now, they'll make an exception for you because you haven't shown any of those Black tendencies because you're a professional. It is one of the worst places to be when you work in that corporate environment and you realize that everybody you work with, or when you come to find out your high school teachers are ultra conservatives, it destroys you. Or when you talk about race and when you talk about culture with people for the first time and you realize that there's no way they can be your friends. Like you can agree to disagree on, pizza toppings. You can't agree to disagree on racism. And then you also find this other thing out, that they are so incredibly mentally deficient on the history of this country, which means that why would they ever change? Because they became successful. They work at the same job as you. They may have a higher position than you. They may make more money than you. And they got there not knowing anything about the struggles of Black and brown people in America. Those are unredeemable human beings. And that is what the world is like for a lot of us every single day. Because I'm going to tell you what, if you take a white person and you put them in an office environment, and maybe they were hired because they're good and they have the education, but everybody in that office is black. I mean, everybody, the only white person that works in that department, the only white person in middle management, and everybody they talk to is black, and you talk about black issues all the time, and that's what the conversations are at the copy machine or at the water cooler, they would have a fit. They would feel isolated. In fact, when you start to see that white people rebel in a way that is shocking to the consciousness of the world, when they feel like their freedoms are being trampled upon, when you tell them they have to wear a mask, the first thing they go do is get a gun. But black people we don't react that way. We deal with it all of the time. Good morning, Miss Maybelline, who is watching on Twitter. Thank you. Tammy Reed, glad you're with us. She says, good morning, Miss Maybelline says, Republicans on Twitter have no idea about civics, quote, legal votes. You can't even explain it to them, because if you're a reasonable, rational person, they're not going to listen to you because you vote for Democrats. Like, you automatically are discredited because you have a different political view than them. And I just wonder with all of that, how do we get to a place of governing? Tammy Reed says, all too familiar with James T., and he was on 620 a.m. Eileen Seeger says, Charlie Sykes heads up a daily podcast called Bulwark. I'm familiar with it. It's terrific. Charlie is no longer a Republican. He is a never Trumper who was kicked out of the Republican Party. It's a noteworthy daily listen. Okay, I mean, I just know what Charlie Sykes did because he and I think he and I were on for the same time frame. I think he ended at 12:30. My show used to end at noon. And people would listen to Charlie Sykes, and then they would call into my show and would want to moderate a debate. Like, Charlie would be talking about God knows whatever he was talking about when he was on 620. And then I'd be talking about, I don't know, Malcolm X and black people and whatever I used to talk about. And then somebody would call into my program like, oh, sure, well, you won't believe what Charlie Sykes is saying right now. What do you have to say about that? I don't have anything to say about that. Vanessa Garrett says, facts, sure. When I learned that lesson again about coworkers, stay away from them outside of work. That hurts. Let me tell you why that hurts. Because you know how persuasive your coworkers can be? Because you work with them every single day. Now, I had somewhat of an experience with this, but when I worked for City Hall, when I worked for Tom Barrett, the department that I was in, the Department of Administration, was mostly white. But the head of the Department of Administration, Sharon Robinson, was black. And Sharon Robinson, who I knew because she was also my chief of staff when I worked for Tom Barrett when he was in Congress. So they didn't know what to do with me. I came into my position working in the Barrett administration. I got hired in 2004, and I worked for Tom during his first term as mayor. That you had all the middle management white folks, and City Hall, especially those folks that had been there for 30 years at the time, were about as racist as you could possibly get, because they remember when that department was all white and everybody was white up and down, top to bottom. They remember that. And then here I come. And they wanted to treat me poorly, wanted to be disrespectful, but they also knew that I was hired by their black boss, Sharon Robinson. And so they couldn't really do much with me. But you could tell, because who is he? Who does he think he is? Because if you come in I wasn't a political appointee, but I kind of was, because Tom Barrett will hire his people. He always has. But how uncomfortable I felt around some of those people. And then I had black coworkers that made buddy and nice with those folks, because you're probably in a better position to be nice to your white coworkers than to have an antagonistic relationship with them, because they'll go to HR on you in a second. The other thing they'll do is this: don't get into disagreements with your white coworkers, because they're going to document everything. Oh, you don't believe me? Just watch. There will be a file on you that you didn't know about until you get called into the office, because you finally get mad and you let one of your coworkers have it, not physically, but you just tell them how you feel. And then you go sit down in HR. Well, we have a list of things that you said here, going back to the start of your tenure here, that you got into arguments and disagreements, because we have a whole file here on you. Now you're fired. That's how they play the game. And so they can be very persuasive, because when you say that you don't want to go to happy hour or you don't go to the Christmas party, and here's the thing, you should be able to go to happy hour, go to the Christmas party and enjoy yourself. And let me not talk you out of it completely, because I'm sure there's diversity in workplaces now. I'm just talking about when I was in that environment, it was dangerous. Because if they get you drunk and get you comfortable and you say something that you think is funny, they're going to write that one down too. Even though you're off the clock and you're out of the job, he's not a good fit for our climate here because he got drunk and was swinging from the chandelier at the Christmas party. But the white folks can swing from the chandelier, sometimes with no clothes on, and it's funny when they do it. If you're black and you act like they do, well, you're a whole different kind of person, you see. You just got to be very, very careful. It's a very lonely existence. Tammy Reed says, I don't believe he is no longer Republican. I can believe he has softened his stances on some things, maybe, but he is definitely an anti-Trumper, though. You know, I guess these days being an anti-Trumper does suffice for no longer being a Republican, or whatever the case may be. So the moral of the story today, and sorry about the bit of the mix-up that we had earlier in the program, is that our Democrats going to be able to pull together the very diverse coalition. Some are moderate, some are very progressive, some are anti-Trumpers. Can we pull that coalition together in order to move forward policy-wise? Because if Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, if their administration and their very diverse cabinet don't make substantial gains in a variety of different places, then the 2022 midterm elections are going to be a serious shellacking for the Democrats. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play the Tim Wise clip that I started the first broadcast with, which for some reason you guys couldn't see me because I'm doing something different now. I'm broadcasting on Twitter and on YouTube and on Facebook all at the same time, which clearly is above my pay grade. So I'm going to play that Tim Wise clip, and I think it's really, really important to fill in some of the blanks that folks may have that have never had to deal with or talk about race on the levels in which we have to talk about it now. Because the only way that we move forward as a country and as a society is if we all have the same facts and the same information. And from that, we can make much better informed decisions. Thank you, guys. And here's that clip from Tim Wise.
When we look around and we see today in our politics, a rich white man telling working class white people that their problem is brown people, we need to understand the historical pedigree of that. That is symbolic of the entire history of race and class politics in America. The history of rich white people telling working class and poor white people that their problem are black and brown people. So beginning in the 1600s, that is what happens. Prior to about 1670 or so, there was no such thing as the white race, at least not recognized as such, called as such. That is not what people of European descent were when they were in Europe. They were English, they were Irish, they were Scottish, they were whatever they were. They were not white. Only in the colonies do we become white, and for a very specific reason, because in those early years of the colonial period, where you had white indentured servants, one level above enslaved themselves, and you had African descended folks, some of them enslaved for life, others indentured servants also in the earliest years of the colonies. Those people would often see their interests as being common. They all realized that they were being screwed over by the same landowners, the same elite. They fomented various rebellions like Bacon's Rebellion in Virginia, others as well. And as a result, the elite in the colonies realized that they had to figure out a way to get the other folks from Europe on their team. So they created this mentality that said, you're now a member of the white race. You're on our team. You're wearing our uniform. Now you're at the end of the bench. You may not get in the game, but you're on our team, you see. So then they start putting white folks, now called, on the slave patrols, right? Didn't really give them any land or any real power except the power to control people of color, which is why folks of color say, and they are right, that modern policing traces to the system of slave patrols and slavery. And we have to be clear on that because that's the history. Right? So whiteness was created to divide and conquer, to create the notion that even though you might not have much, at least you're not black, at least you're not indigenous, at least you're not Mexican, at least you're not Chinese working on the railroads to build the transcontinental economy. You may not have much, but at least you have, as W.E.B. Du Bois said, the psychological wage of whiteness. And it's a trick that was played during the Civil War era on my people in the South, right? Rich folk, landowners in the South telling poor white folks who didn't own anything that they got to go out and fight to preserve the rich man's property in human beings. Fascinating. Why would you do that? Why would I go fight for your property? Well, because you told me that if I don't, these slaves are going to take my job. No, fool, they got your job. That's the point. If you got to charge $1 a day and you can make them work for free because you own them, guess who got the gig, Jack? Not you. So in fact, the system of enslavement was in the long run against the class interest of working class white folks, but they got suckered. Same thing happened in the union movement. You had white labor union folks who didn't want black and brown bodies in their union because it would reduce the professionalism of the craft. No, fool, it'll double the size of your union. And then when you go out on strike, they can't replace your happy ass with the brown folk that you didn't want next to you in the first place. Because when they do replace you with them, then you will blame them, not the elite. See how that works? It's a trick. And it has worked for hundreds of years. It is working on some folk right now. And it is our job to resist that with every fiber of our being.